Marlee Matlin, you directed the episode Ava's Story from the anthology series Accused. Now, you're primarily known for your work as an actor. Is directing something that you've always been interested in?
Directing has always been in the back of my mind. I guess ever since I started working as an actor, really. When I began, I had to really pay attention to everything that was going on the set. The fact that all of the preparation as an actor and being on the set involved watching everyone, seeing everybody's job. But working with a director was my favorite thing to do because as an actor, obviously, I need to be directed. I need to be able to work. And I have thoughts and they have thoughts. But yeah, directing, it was always there. And back then I thought, well, wait a minute, how is a deaf person going to direct? Is that possible even? Because the fact that there are communication barriers, and I'm talking about 30 years ago. And as time went on and the years went by, I began to understand, well, wait a minute, it is possible to direct. It does not matter whether you're deaf or not. It's just as a matter of knowing and being aware of what a director has to do, knowing and using your creative mind, knowing and using what you see. And so I took the moment to step into the directing chair, and I am so happy that I did.
And what made you choose this particular project? What stood out to it for you that made you want to direct this story?
Well, when I was offered the job from Howard Gordon, of course, he's the showrunner, and I knew that he was great. Then he presented the script from Marlee Matlin. And when the team reached out to me and said, look, we have a script and we have a producer, and let's have a conversation on Zoom. And the one thing that really brought me on board, and I knew that I hit the jackpot, was the story itself, which had both hearing and deaf characters in it. It was about an authentic story about a deaf woman and the experiences that she went through. And I knew immediately that I was in the right place because the script, the story, and my gut told me, and I began to imagine and envision all the scenes. It was just a perfect coming together of everything for me to make my directing debut.
And what's it like to work with deaf actors in the cast, and to be able to communicate with them as a deaf director and to give them that level of comfort?
All the years that I've been working mostly with hearing actors, obviously, it's usually been a whole hearing crew. Everybody on the set is hearing, and I got accustomed to that, obviously. There were never any, I would have interpreters. There were the means to facilitate communication with full access. But now when working with deaf actors, working together was probably something I've never experienced before because it was 100% accessible communication wise. And directing them they got to the point where they said that they were directed for the first time. There were no barriers there. We were able to, I was able to observe them at work, watch their creative process, bring out different aspects of their emotions and whatever it was that they needed for the character. And at the end of the day, it was the same as it would be if I was a hearing person working with a hearing director. A lot of times I would say when I work with the hearing actors, let me connect directly with them without using an interpreter, because I can speak and I can understand. And I know the experience as an actor. I know what processes they're going through. And it was one of the many things that was so fun to be able to, well, one in particular, was to be able to watch them work, to really focus on a character. It was just amazing. And at the end of the day, it was great working with everybody, the crew. We also had a deaf crew on board, and it all came together seamlessly. It was a beautiful experience to witness, and it was a great experience for me.
Now, this episode tells the story of a deaf woman on trial for kidnapping the child that she carried as a surrogate. So we're learning a lot about surrogacy and what it's like to raise a deaf child. Like, how much research went into it, and how much did you know about this kind of subject matter already going into this episode?
I actually had no idea about the topic of surrogacy, the processes that one has to go through to be a surrogate. All I knew is that you have to have already had a child yourself. You've had to birth a child in order to have one on behalf of someone else. What was unique about Ava's story was it was about a woman who happened to be deaf, who happened to be carrying a child, knowing that whatever she would earn from the surrogacy would help her go through college. And it just so happened that the couple that she birthed the baby for, that baby was deaf, not because of the surrogate, but because whatever the couple carried. And it turned out that the mother, the surrogate, had deafness in her family. So you would think that because the surrogate was deaf, the child would be deaf. That's not the reason at all. It was because of the fact that the mother who was asking the surrogate to birth her baby had deafness in her family. There was there's lots of things in your family, in your background that you don't know. And this happened to be one of them that we brought to the story. And I understood the fear of Ava and how she saw the hearing parents' decision to raise this child who was deaf. The fact that they were going to be doing things that weren't they were doing things that were controversial, particularly in the deaf world, by giving the child a cochlear implant at a very young age, hoping that it would be a miracle that she would suddenly hear. And that's not how it works. And, when you have a cochlear implant, it may work for some, it may not work for a lot of others, but those with cochlear implants, at the end of the day, when you take it off at night, when you go to bed, you're still deaf. But the point of the story is that the young deaf woman was fearful of the fact that the hearing couple would not give their child the language that's so important, American Sign Language, to expose her to that. And it really became a life decision because a lot of deaf children are language deprived. And her experience, the surrogate's experience of growing up language deprived, she fought on behalf of the child that she birthed because she felt that they were going to language deprive her as well. So that's why she did what she did by kidnapping the baby.
And coming into this as a director, what was your favorite aspect of the directing process?
Bottom line is, I learned to look at a set in a completely different way. I learned that every crew member is as equally as important as everyone else. They are there to make your job easier, to make your show look good. And my favorite part was working in pre-production. So much fun. It's like painting, it's like you're creating a piece of artwork, putting it all together, and location scouting, wardrobe. I mean, it was the opportunity to work with every single person and make sure that, like just paying a visit to the offices that in the production office. It was so exciting to see how one script can come to life, one word in a script can come to life as a result of all these people working together. As an actor, as a director, watching the actors working, watching them doing their job, I loved working with them, listening to them, and communicating with them. It was just a lot of fun. The creative process, the improvisation that we did. At the end of the day, I wanted a fun set, and I believe that we accomplished that. So many favorite things on the set, so many. It was all amazing, and I'm very grateful too.
Is directing something that you think you'll continue to pursue?
I'd love to direct. I'd love to direct if they'll have me. And I plan to. I mean, I want to learn so much more about the camera, the lenses, how to light properly, the costuming that goes on to making the story the way you want to make it. And I just happen to tell my story through my eyes. I look forward to it.
Well, congratulations on your work on Accused, and I look forward to seeing more from you as a director.
Thank you. Thank you.
Eliza Hittman, you served as an executive producer and director of the limited series A Friend of the Family, which tells the strange and disturbing story of a man who kidnapped his neighbor's daughter on more than one occasion. How much did you know about this story before this project came to you?
The truth is, I knew nothing about the real story. I hadn't seen the Netflix documentary, so I came to it really with fresh eyes. I received the script from the writer showrunner Nick Antosca, and it was just so exceptionally written. And the characters were so vivid on the page, and the world was so sort of beautifully rendered that I just kind of devoured the script immediately, which rarely happens. And I met with Nick, and then I went and I, educated myself on the Netflix documentary and everything else that had been written about the case and the abductions. But really, my desire to work on the show came from the caliber of the script that I was handed initially.
And how did watching the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight, did that inform your approach to telling the story in any way, or did you feel like you really wanted to kind of take this story in its own direction?
It didn't really inform the show for me. I think the documentary was an hour long, and there was so much that it left out. The relationship that Jan Broberg had with Berchtold lasted a decade. So I think that the documentary tells a very complicated story that feels far-fetched to an audience because there's so much missing and omitted from the narrative based on how compressed the documentary was. So I think that what the show does is it really, opens up the 10 years of their lives and shows how he was able to manipulate and sort of get control of her life. It just wasn't something, that the documentary was able to really address.
And how was it telling this story with Jan Broberg herself being involved in the project as a producer? Having that access to the subject must have been valuable.
I think that I've thought a lot about the ethics of true crime. And what appealed to me about the show was having Jan as a collaborator whose voice was heard through the writing of the show, and her presence was on set every day. And I think it's a rare scenario to see a true crime series where the victim has given consent to their story being told. From an artistic perspective, I think that what Jan did was bring a level of depth to the characters that maybe we wouldn't have had she not been on set. Like, I can give you an example. Her father in in real life, he was a florist, and he had many kind of encounters with Berchtold that veered into sexual encounters or assaults. And I think it would have been easy to judge him and said, oh, maybe he was closeted, maybe this, maybe that. But having Jan talk about how she experienced him, prevented us from judging or limiting the representation of who those real people were. She would say, no, my father, he had such a bright sense of humor. And then we were able to talk about that with Colin Hanks and bring the essence of these people that, yes, they had this sort of dark journey, but they were also real people living their life every day. And that wasn't always what she saw. And so I think Jan's perspective on her family, on who her parents were as individuals, as who they were as parents, it really helped bring shades of color to all of these characters on screen.
And speaking of shades of characters, you've got Jake Lacey giving this central performance where he has to be, this unsettling figure, but also charismatic enough that we as an audience believe that he would win over this family. What was it like working with him and really kind of getting the nuances of that character?
Jake is phenomenal, just as a human being, as an actor. And I think what was exciting about casting him in this role is that he hadn't done it before. He really hasn't played this kind of villainous man in his career, so it was new for him. So how we discovered the character, how we came up with the character's motivation, and what the driving force is behind Berchtold was something we really got to work on together. And that made it a joy for me, was to have an actor who was sort of hungry for a dialogue with the director, because it was new territory. I think that, what was important for us in sort of honing in on who the character was we really talked about in the beginning of the series approaching it like a love story. Like, in a way, Jake thinks of his character as sort of a Romeo running away with this young woman who also happens to only be 11. The piece of it he can't see. The piece of it he can't, for him, it's just a sort of taboo love story. The age didn't factor into his thinking. So to sort of set up and launch the series, we did not want to present him as a villain. We wanted to present him as a man who had fallen in love with somebody he wasn't allowed to be with. And here they are running away together. And I think that was a more interesting choice than trying to, play a bad guy, or to try and really get into the psychology of the real man, which I think is impossible. I think it's impossible to really know what goes on inside a sociopath's head, or a pedophile's head, but for this show and for the representation of the real story, we focused on, one thing, which is his sort of love and, the happiness he experiences when he's in Jan's company.
And you're well known for the independent films that you have directed. How is the process on a limited series like this creatively different from independent film?
Well, I think the process is not different. I think what was different for me is that I did not write it. And being able to just come on set as a director in a way can be liberating, because I'm just using that one side of my brain essentially, and I'm allowed to work in different styles, and it gives me kind of an open sandbox to explore and direct in a way that I normally wouldn't do in one of my own scripts. So I would say that it just kind of creates a lot of opportunity for me to break out of my own sensibility and to take the weight off my shoulders of kind of carrying the pressure of being the author of the project from beginning to end. So it's an opportunity, really. And I think Nick is a brilliant showrunner, and he really trusts directors, and he's not trying to sort of direct from the sidelines necessarily. He loves he loves the melding of two imaginations. So that made it even more exciting. And we were both looking at a lot of references from 70s cinema, and that was also fun for us to kind of go down and look at films like Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Badlands, and try and look at sort of the language and the feel and the textures, and how do you bring that to a TV show that's shooting 2 episodes in like 14 days? I don't know, but we tried.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the show. Certainly if there were time constraints, you wouldn't know it on screen. It's a fantastic piece of work, and thank you so much for talking to me about it today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hiro Murai, you served as a director and producer of the series Atlanta, which ended its run last fall. It explored so many different avenues and ideas, so it seemed especially ripe for experimentation creatively. Did you feel like you got to grow a lot over the course of the 4 seasons as a director?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first narrative anything I ever directed was the pilot for Atlanta, and so the whole cast and crew that came together for it. This was a lot of us. It was our first TV experience, with the exception of Donald Glover, and so yeah, I mean, finishing the show this season really felt like, the senior year of high school. We just kind of watched each other grow up, and we're kind of putting a bow on this 4-season experience that we got to go through together.
And you shot the last 2 seasons back to back. How challenging an experience was that? Like, how much time did that take overall? What was that experience like?
It's probably not. I wouldn't advise doing it. It's not a. It's not a very sustainable way of making television, I don't think. But we were with kind of a core group of people that we collaborated with for years. So, and we just kind of loved being around each other. So that piece of it was helpful. But we were in. I think we started production in 2021. I think February or March, and we shot all of the Europe section first until about summer, and then we took a month to prep again in Atlanta. But we were basically in prep and production for 10 months that year, and then we posted, we edited, and colored, VFX, everything the next year for another maybe eight months. So we were on the between writing and posting. I think we were in it for maybe like 2.5 years, which feels insane to think about now.
And the way the show ends in the episode you directed, the finale, takes us into surreal directions that the show has been in, kind of before. What did you think about that finale script when you first read it? Just sort of the ideas of the surreal qualities of the show taking over again.
I was really unsure how we were going to land this show, because it's so many different things, like you mentioned before, and we've experimented with so many different things and different genres. So I wasn't really sure what the best way to park the entire series was. But when I saw the script, there was something about how playful and strange and kind of irreverent it was. It felt like any other episode of Atlanta in a very ephemeral way. And there's something sort of very purely us about that script that felt right. We weren't trying to end on a big sort of emotional climax or give a big buttoned up closure for all the characters. It just felt like the characters want to just keep on living on after this finale episode. And so there's something about that felt really right for us. That script actually was originally intended to be like a mid-season episode, and you can probably kind of tell, like, there's something about it that feels a little like thrown away or kind of not taking itself too seriously. And there's something about that tone that we just felt like, oh, this kind of feels like our way of ending a series of television. And also, like Keith, Darius' character was always such a he was a character that really defined our show in a lot of ways, even though a lot of the stories weren't centered around him. He had kind of has like a stoned out, kind of hazy way of looking at the world. And we loved the idea that in the finale, we kind of contextualize the entire tone and spirit of the show as Darius's perspective. We're kind of retconning the tone of the show as having been seen through his character. And so everything about it just kind of felt like it was right, as silly as it felt at times.
And now that the show is over, looking back on the 4 seasons, what will you miss the most about working on Atlanta?
I think the most beautiful thing about that show was that we really didn't know how to make a TV show before we started making it. And so it really was an experimentation every step of the way. And, we lucked out with the cast and crew. It's such an incredible group of talent, but we also all loved each other and trusted each other so much. So it really felt like a beautiful sandbox that we built that we could just do anything with. And it's funny because I don't think I really realized how remarkable or unique that environment was until we finished making it. Having been on different TV productions, and I've worked with a lot of great collaborators since then, but there's something about the chemistry of all the people involved on that show that felt really unique and special. And and like I said, I think it also was that it was the first time we got to do this for a lot of us, and even some of the actors, this is the first time they were on a TV show. And so there was something about it that felt really pure in a way that I don't think you really get to experience very often on TV, which kind of a lot of times function as like a factory, So yeah, I look back on that very fondly.
And since the show premiered, Donald Glover has won a couple of Emmys, a few Grammys. Brian Tyree Henry and Lakeith Stanfield both earned Oscar nominations in recent years. What has it been like seeing everyone's lives and careers develop in the way that it has since the show began?
I mean, it's incredible, honestly. We're all still on a text chain together. So every time, we drive past the billboard, an Oscar campaign billboard with Brian's face on it, we text each other on that chain. And it's very, I think it's surreal for all of us, that everybody's careers blew up the way it did, and, how humble it felt in the very beginning. But, the beautiful thing about coming back together for this last season was that even though everybody's been on insane journeys individually, when we were all back together, it felt very much like 7 years ago when we shot the pilot. The dynamic was very familial, and nobody came back with an award show wrapped around their neck. You know what I mean? There's no ego or change, and once we kind of were back together, it just felt like the chemistry was very much the same.
And you've worked with Donald Glover on a number of projects beyond Atlanta. What do you find fulfilling about that creative partnership with him that's continued over the years?
I try not to overthink it. We started working together maybe 10 years ago on a lot of music projects, and I don't know why, but it was always just very easy with him. He's a really brilliant idea guy, performer, obviously. And for whatever reason, whenever he brought me into a project or we started talking about something together, sometimes it just feels easy. Just the collaboration has the right partners involved, and the ideas just start developing on their own in a lot of ways. And then we're always happy with the process and the outcome. So I don't really know the I don't want to get too analytical about what works about it, but it's always been enjoyable. And we're somehow I've filmed Donald for hundreds of hours, and we're still not sick of each other. So there must be something good there.
I want to congratulate you on your work on this final season of Atlanta and on the show as a whole, and your continued work with Donald Glover. I look forward to seeing even more of it as time goes on.
Thanks so much.
Alex Vietmeier, you're the director for Late Night with Seth Meyers. Now the show's been on for coming on almost a decade now. What's it been like, approaching a decade of work on the show? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. And it's something that I know myself and the crew, we talk about a lot as well, just how the show has evolved for us and for Seth over the time period. The The biggest change, I suppose, was early on when Seth went from doing a standing monologue to sitting behind the desk. That was about a year in. And from that point on, the tone of the show really found itself with Seth. And then the biggest change for us was obviously, the biggest change for most people was COVID and how we had to respond to that. And some of the changes and things that we made and how they've stuck with us. For example, prior to COVID, we would do a full test show with an audience at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. All the monologue jokes, all the comedy bits, we'd run them for a test audience, and then they'd go back and think about them, rewrite them, and we'd bring it back for the main taping. Well, with COVID, we started having to tape the show earlier when Seth was in his apartment, because you'd have to send these giant video and media files to editors who'd have to edit it together. So everything took longer. So Seth was finishing taping around like 3 o'clock, say. So we went back into the studio and it was like, well, why are we waiting so long? Let's keep it spontaneous. Let's do this. So we did. We got rid of the rehearsal and we go out there, and Seth is fresh with the jokes the first time, and they'll either really work with the audience, or what can be even more fun is when they really don't work with the audience and how we respond to that. He'll talk to people off camera, and I'll have to decide very quickly, is this a person worth spinning the camera around to grab a shot of? Like Wally, the cue card guy. If Wally's holding up a cue card and he misspelled something and it throws it off or leaves a word out, which happens often, not often, love Wally, often enough that it becomes a bit. And so then, I had to quickly get a shot of him so that Seth and Wally can have a little back and forth. But famously, if Seth is talking to our producer, Mike Shoemaker, at the desk, I am never to turn the camera towards him, which it's a fun little thing that everybody on the crew knows. And anytime a new camera guy comes in, I get to explain, never do it. Don't do it. Even though you want to, keep the camera on Seth. So those are types of the changes over the past 10 years. Seth now is probably the most comfortable he's been. He loves the show the way it is. It's loose. You can tell by his wardrobe. He hasn't gone back to his suit. He keeps it casual. The conversations are just natural and fluid with the guests, which from a director's standpoint makes my job very easy, because I follow Seth. I go where he goes. And when he's comfortable and loving every minute of it, it just makes it very easy to sit back and make a show for the people at home to watch and feel that same vibe.
You've been nominated for a couple of Emmys now for your work. And this year, for consideration, you're entering the January 17th episode that featured Common, journalist Jonathan Lemire, and performance from Some Like It Hot, the Tony-nominated Broadway show. What stood out to you about that as an example of your direction, and what were you especially proud of there?
Yeah. So I love when Broadway comes on our show. I love those collaborations that we get to make with all the Broadway performers and productions. And we at the show especially love Amber Ruffin, who was one of the writers of Some Like It Hot. So it was a perfect combination there. Being able to collaborate with the director and choreographer of a Broadway show and be able to take what they do every night on their stage and put it on the television screen, and be able to use the camera lens to bring our television audience to see different perspectives and angles is very exciting to me. It's something I really like to do. And something that's very challenging that really makes me love it is I have, let's say the song is 3.5 minutes. I have 3.5 minutes to have our TV audience understand the relationships that are created over 2 hours in their Broadway show. And how can I use the camera to relate these characters' stories very quickly so that an audience member at home can enjoy, first of all, the spectacle and the dancing and the singing, but also to try and make those connections with the storyline. It's very important to me to try and find a way to connect that storyline back to our viewing audience. So it's not just a musical performance, but they get to feel like they saw a little piece of an actual Broadway presentation. So that was one moment in that show. And the other thing I really loved, there's a bit at the beginning called Joke Seth Can't Tell, which is when we bring out two of our writers, Amber Ruffin and Jenny Hagel. And the whole premise, the setup is Seth is a straight white man. There's a lot of jokes that come across his desk that he can't tell. So he brings out Jenny and Amber to tell the jokes for him. And in the course of telling jokes, there's a certain rhythm that exists with Seth's pacing, with the audience's laughing, and with me trying to feel all of that out and make cuts and graphic changes at the right time. When you put two more comedians up there, it gets even more fun and a little more out of control, because while the jokes are scripted, the reactions aren't. And as I mentioned previously, we don't rehearse these with Seth anymore. So it's all genuine moments, and just being able to capture those and at the right time to get the right laugh is something I really enjoy. And I think that episode specifically calls out all those fun things.
And to have gotten those couple of Emmy nominations over the last 2 years, what, especially as the show has developed over multiple years, what did those mean to you, and what do you think about that recognition in general that the show has gotten?
I mean, it's exciting. It's obviously one of those things where, when you're not nominated, you're like, oh, it doesn't matter. But then as soon as you get one, you're like, oh, this is really cool. So there's a lot of that emotion, obviously. I think the timing of it just speaks specifically to how the show has really become the best version of itself since the changes we made as a result of COVID and home shows. That timing's not lost on me. And I think it comes through. It starts with Seth and how he feels and how happy he is with the show. And it just translates through everything we do.
And you mentioned jokes Seth can't tell, which we see in that episode. What are some other favorite recurring segments on late night that you enjoy, especially as a director?
Yes. So our main recurring bit is called A Closer Look. We do that 3 nights a week, which is our hot take on the news of the day, of the week, of whatever the story is of the moment. That segment, to me, I'm especially proud of. We've been doing it so long now, it's turned into a machine. But just the way those scripts are able to come in so late in the day, and my associate director, our graphics team, our researchers, our editors, how they can pool all of that together. And sometimes it's 30 seconds before we start, and Amy, my AD, will say, okay, we're ready. It's like, great, let's go. That ability to make topical jokes in such a limited amount of time is a whole lot of fun and very rewarding. What's even more fun, the way Sal will write some of these jokes, he'll have a piece of tape, a soundbite, finish a setup that Seth makes. Seth, and it's the way they close every one of them. Seth won't know what that piece of tape is. He'll set it up, and then I'll roll the tape to finish it and get the laugh. And it's really fun, and it's really challenging, just trying to time and be right there with Seth and know when he's going to want the tape to roll it right on cue so it finishes his sentence and gets the laugh. So even after all the years of doing A Closer Look, everyone is still a challenge and fun to try and do.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the show, on your Emmy nominations for the show. Knock on wood, your Emmy nominations to come for the show. And thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thanks, Daniel.
Owen Harris, you're a director and producer of Mrs. Davis, which is about a nun who is on a mission against an all-seeing, all-knowing artificial intelligence. That old story. It's such a bold and unusual premise for a show. What did you think about the idea when the project first came your way?
I thought it was a work of lunacy. No, I didn't really. I thought it was a really I read they sent me the pilot, and I read it, and I think I sent a message to my agent saying, what on earth have I just read? And then that was quickly followed up by another email where I said, but I love it and I really want to make it. But no, it's a very original, fun, joyful piece that, from the minds of Damon Lindelof and Tara Hernandez. And yeah, it was just something that just had a tonality to it that felt incredibly refreshing. I think they wrote it during the pandemic, and so it's sort of like I guess a love child of the pandemic, and it had this just a real sense of everything that people had been experiencing during the pandemic, a sense of sort of feeling a bit lost, wanting to find answers, wanting to feel reassurance. And I think that part of the sense of optimism that I think that certainly the pilot that I read and then the show itself captures allows you to sort of have a bit of hope, even though the subject matter that it's talking about, explores all sorts of things to do with faith and our relationship with faith and technology. Ultimately, it just did so with a great sense of sort of joy and optimism, which I found very appealing at the time.
And the way the show blends this unique number of like different styles and tones, was it challenging to be the director of those first 2 episodes and really set the tone and kind of balance all of those elements?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's both challenging and also a lot of fun. I think we all had a conversation very early on and it sort of went along the lines of you only get to have this much fun if the audience feels like someone's got a really firm hold of the reins. And I think that's sort of what the challenge was of a show that takes these big wild leaps and genre surfs in the way that it does. I think that part of that sort of high wire act is sort of enjoying the sort of the mystery and the sort of the dropping of the breadcrumbs, but also knowing when enough is enough and when to start to reward the viewer or the audience with answers, or keeping them entertained with sort of the action, just figuring out where the balance was in terms of the tease of the story, which it does beautifully, and also how to pay off that sort of drama where plot is messing around with your head quite a lot. And so yeah, it's a really fun challenge. And it's the sort of work that I've always been, from doing Black Mirrors, it's the sort of stuff that I've always enjoyed and have always been drawn to.
And as you mentioned, Black Mirror, you've worked on that show as well, and it's the only thing I can imagine that's even close to comparable to this kind of strange speculative world. Did you feel like that really prepared you for to walk into this universe?
Yes, I mean, definitely. It's I guess it's looking at sort of not really sci-fi, but sort of tech-fi, or the sort of the near future, in terms of our relationship with technologies. And Black Mirror does that, has always done that very beautifully. I think that when I've done three Black Mirrors, and when I read Mrs. Davis, I just felt like the world was doing such a good job of being dystopian, that I felt like it was time for me to maybe do something that had a sort of more uplifting energy, and a sort of a joyful heartbeat to it. And I think that it's still, you're still able to sort of examine, the human condition and deep subjects, but certainly with the levity that Mrs. Davis brings to it, it was a really refreshing take on where we are right now as human beings, which is something that Black Mirror did so brilliantly. And I think Mrs. Davis, I was always, when I did Black Mirrors, I was always drawn to the sort of the stories that had, I guess, a sense of soul, and relationships at their heart. And certainly Mrs. Davis does the same. It keeps those very grounded sort of relationships as the core, and then it allows you to spin off into these sort of wild flights of fantasy, which is really fun.
You've also worked on, Brave New World, the new Twilight Zone. Is that kind of speculative kind of fiction and those kinds of stories something that you're particularly drawn to, or is that just kind of the way the opportunities have come?
Probably a bit of both. I think that I'm absolutely interested in stories about sort of the near future, or almost to the point where I remember when we on Black Mirrors, that the idea about the tech was that we always wanted it to feel almost present, almost like you could walk into a store the very next day and see some piece of technology being trialed that would allow you to sort of do something like this. It's sort of like it's looking at where we are right now and considering where we might be just tomorrow, if we carry on down the paths that we're going along. And so I think that it allows you to sort of look at life today through a certain lens. And I think that what I've always enjoyed about that sort of storytelling is that it's not necessarily driving towards an answer, it's more opening up a question. So it allows you to talk about what the episodes, or in the case of Black Mirror, each one was an anthology, and each one would sort of open a debate or your head to an idea. And I love that sort of storytelling that isn't necessarily trying to guide you in one direction or the other. And I sort of feel like Mrs. Davis is the same. It allows you to sort of consider things that are very much part of your life today, with a sort of an eye on where we're going in the future. And it doesn't try to solve any of these questions, but it allows you to look at them through a different lens, which I think's really fun to be involved in.
And in addition to those first two episodes, you directed episode 5, which is you're directing an episode about the creation of the world's most ambitious Super Bowl commercial to showcase the Holy Grail. Tell me about reading that script and what sort of reactions you've gotten to that episode since it premiered, and just how the show continues to evolve in these interesting directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the commercial became even sort of more meta than it even appears in the show, because we ended up shooting the commercial opens the whole season, but you don't realize at the time it's a commercial, not until episode 5, where you reveal what the whole premise is. And when we were shooting it, we were actually shooting the commercial while shooting the behind the scenes commercial, which actually appears in episode 5. So there were not only the actors on set and crew on set, but then there were also background playing crew, but also some of our own crew in front of the camera being crew. There was another director on set that I was directing, and she herself was directing some of the acts. So it all became quite sort of wonderfully chaotic. And you are trying to capture something that as filmmakers we exist in. It's how we go about our jobs, and there's an element of sort of organized chaos to filmmaking. And so to capture that spirit and that energy was really fun. And the way that it was written bizarrely set us up in this way that we had to sort of shoot it in a way that made the filming of us filming was actually baked into the script. So doing that was a lot of fun. And then obviously, doing something where you're trying to mimic the ambition of a 90s Super Bowl ad is always quite a lot of fun. And I think that everyone, when you're set the challenges that Mrs. Davis sort of sets you episode by episode, I think in the end what you find is that everyone's constantly sort of raising their game to try and meet these creative challenges. And I think that every episode in a way almost felt like a pilot. The one thing about, constantly every time a new episode would come in, it's sort of expect the unexpected, and then even the unexpected is going to be unexpected. And it's it constantly challenges you to figure out a way of bringing that to the screen and figuring it out and collaborating. And no, it was a huge amount of fun trying to make it all work. And yeah, and I think the thing I like most about episode 5, I guess, is that it was the one that I was most sort of apprehensive about, because you spend a whole chunk of time away from Betty and Jake, Simone and Wiley, your main characters. So not only have you asked the audience to invest all this time and go with you on this crazy ride, you're now saying, hold on a second, we're going to put them to one side for a second, we're going to go off on this other journey. But I was super happy with the way that it sort of came together in terms of, it allowed us to create another story that actually managed to maintain the emotional core and the sort of the investment in the fact that there were stakes And so yeah, it was a really, you know, again, it's you're juggling a lot of things, and you're trying to tune them all to make sure that it's all going to end in one place, and the right place. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the show, and you know, certainly one of the most unique pieces of television I've seen in a while. And thank you so much for talking with me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I'm Gold Derby editor Daniel Montgomery, and this is our Meet the Experts TV Directors panel with Marlee Matlin from Accused, Hiro Murai from Atlanta, Alex Vietmeier from Late Night with Seth Meyers, and Owen Harris from Mrs. Davis. Now, first off, I wonder, as directors, what directors have you looked up to, or who have informed your work, you know, whether you've been doing this for a while or whether this is relatively new to you, in terms of inspiring your work? Let's start with Marlee.
I have to be the first? Okay. Well, actually, I have to mention that watching all of you talk about your respective careers have inspired me. Just you as directors here and your remarks have really inspired me. Thank you for your informative experiences, and I hope to work with you someday. I remember working with Randa Haynes from Children of a Lesser God. That was my first film, my first director, my first everything. And I have to say that I remember working with her one-on-one. She really kicked my ass, to put it mildly. She cared because she knew exactly what it was that I needed to do as an actor, what it was that I needed to bring to the role. She put trust in me, and then I learned to trust her. And it was all about trust. I really looked up to her way of informing me about how to do whatever it is the character, how to think, how to feel, asking me questions about what it was that I would do if I actually lived the experiences that my character was living. And it really blew my mind. And I have to say that also being a woman and learning so much from her as a woman who was a director, wearing all the different hats on the set every day, 12 to 15 hours, constantly nonstop. She was like an Energizer bunny. She really did everything. And I was just amazed. I was in awe of her and how she dedicated herself to each and every one's job on the set. So that's something that really impacted me. Other directors, of course, I've worked with, whether it was on the West Wing or Switched at Birth or the L Word, I had great experiences, many, many great experiences. But Randa, I mean, and I always enjoy talking with directors and what they think and what they're seeing. It's the first thing I do when I come to a set. When I come to a set the first day during the day, knowing that, for example, if I'm working on a series and I have different directors for each episode, the first day they come in, I look at them to see how they work, and I meet them one-on-one, and I say, please don't be intimidated just because I'm deaf, because you might be afraid of the communication. It's just like it is for anybody else. So yeah, Randa Haynes really was the one who I think of when I'm working on a set as a director. And
Yeah,
Sean
how about you,
Heater
Hiro?
for Coda. Wait, Sean Heater
Oh,
too for
yeah.
Coda. Sean Heater for Coda too. She really kicked my ass. She was amazing too. She learned to sign. She learned to communicate with us, everybody, and she was a badass. I love her.
Hiro, how about you?
Pretty early on in making Atlanta, I think the directors that we always use as comps was Coen Brothers. You know, and I've always been a Coen Brothers fan. But that specifically for our show, there's something about the way they stage things. There's kind of this like dry, deadpan, existential absurdism to everything that just felt like we're trying to do the same thing, you know. I mean, they're also, you know, all their films tend to be kind of fish out of water stories that take place in the South. And so there's like I think there's like a spiritual connection between us and what they were doing. So in the beginning, especially, we just try to ape them as much as possible, and just try to kind of capture, you know, some of the things that felt sort of magical and specific about the way they do things. Now, I think they have a really beautiful way of blending, you know, comedy with drama, and you know, kind of their use of violence too is very often shocking and surprising. And so, you know, as we were trying to build this show that felt like it could sort of tip in any direction, we try to look for filmmakers that can capture that sort of tonal ambiguity, you know, like strangeness, for lack of a better word. And so those were the guys for us in the beginning.
Owen?
I was really pleased you didn't ask me first. So thank you, Marlee, for yeah. My God, I'm either, you know, I suppose probably like all of us, both you know, eclectic, I suppose, and hopefully not fickle. But when I say that, I mean that I suppose when you're working on a job, you start to sort of, something will start to sort of come to you in terms of reference. And so funny enough, like Hiro, the last job I did, again, I started sort of thinking a lot about Coen brothers, again, for the sort of similar reasons, their ability to sort of combine humor with absurdity, with sort of raw emotion and scale and spectacle. And all of those things seem to work really, really well in terms of creating that project. But I think probably early on for me, it was sort of Michel Gondry and Spike Jonze. I think they just sort of struck me. I think it was probably in my sort of development as a director in terms of storytelling, just there, I guess the sort of inventiveness with sort of Kaufman scripts and the sort of the magic they started to create, which I think is sort of has echoes now into things like Everything Everywhere. But certainly that sort of real invention and bravery, which I think is something that I try and remind myself to keep hold of every time I take on a job, is to sort of be brave with my choices. So I think that a lot, you know, and that's certainly something I took from their work. It felt like they were prepared to have a swing and have a big swing at it. So that was something. So certainly for me, and I think also that the way they sort of managed to marry sort of absurdity, humor, and sort of poetry in a really interesting way that sort of disarmed you and made you laugh and could make you cry. And so I think that for me at that point, sort of as I was sort of learning my trade, and sort of they probably had the biggest influence in terms of how to set about doing what I do, I think.
And Alex, of course, you're making a very different kind of TV, not narrative, but you know, is there, you know, directors or TV or film that has inspired you?
It's true. So with Variety, there's a small group of us that I admire and look up to all the work they do. And like when sitting here thinking about it, like watching Glenn Weiss and every project he does with the Tonys, with the inauguration concert, just recent examples. It's like I can watch and see something that I'm like, wow, that was really impressive. I'd love to find out, you know, how he did that and bring something like that in. On a personal level, I have to say Liz Patrick, who is currently directing Saturday Night Live. I had the pleasure of working with her very early on in my career, and she really helped mold my sense of timing, that comedic timing, that musical timing. And she has to be the first person that like I got to sit behind and watch as a PA in the control room and watch her direct music. And I was like, wow, this is 100% what I want to keep doing for the rest of my life. So on a personal level, definitely Liz. On a professional level, any Variety director, I could watch something they've done and find something that I was really impressed with and would want to find a way to carry that type of thought on.
And as directors, you know, when you were, you know, getting started, was there something that you wish you had known before you, you know, were getting into this career that, you know, that you learned over time, maybe, Hiro?
Maybe this is like the wrong answer for this, but I feel like what I wish I'd known was that I didn't have to know everything. You know, I think you really get hung up when you're coming in feeling insecure about what you don't know. You know, there's so many facets to directing, and there's so much mythology around filmmaking, you know, that I think you really get in your head about all the things that you don't know yet. And honestly, everything that's been great, you know, any work that's been good has come out of exploration and discovery. You know, so I think the point is to learn real time and kind of embrace that it's a process. You know, and so I think knowing that earlier probably would have saved me a lot of flop sweat.
How about you, Alex?
You can ask questions. I wish I would have realized that a little sooner, that like, yeah, we're the director. That's our title, but it's a team that puts these projects together. If I don't know the best way to handle something, or if I can't imagine, like, how can we get a camera there? Well, ask the person who knows how to get the camera there. That was something that, as I've gotten more comfortable and confident as time has gone on, reaching out and embracing that team aspect, and going into a meeting without all the answers, but maybe with more questions and answers, can really elevate a project.
Owen?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally chime what both Alex and Hiro have said. I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that there is this sort of sense that you go in and you feel like you've got to shoulder everything. And I think that what you learn hopefully very quickly, but certainly over time, is that that's what, you know, you're a team, and that everyone there. And I think it's also about the fact that realizing that in you know, your biggest role, I suppose, is to communicate. And I think that if you can manage that, then you've already taken the right step. And then, but what you shouldn't always feel is that it's then your responsibility alone to then carry these things out. And I think that you hopefully quickly over time, you learn that as a team, it's the way to sort of produce great work. And I think that once you realize that, it does seem to take a lot of the pressure off you in terms of waking up every morning thinking, how do we do this? And actually the best thing to do is just to communicate, either whether it's a fear or the challenge or whatever it is, and share that challenge. And I think that that's something that over time you learn, and once you do, it sort of is a huge support, I think. And then you go into work every day actually looking forward to sharing these challenges and getting on with them.
And Marlee?
Everything that everyone just said here, I mirror everything. I completely agree. Thank you for bringing this all up. I'm going to tell you something for myself on my first time, because this was my first time directing, and this is an anthology series. So that was helpful because I didn't have to be so focused on the chain of what came before me and what goes after me. I just had to focus on my particular episode. So for me, that was a good place to start. But I said, and I did, and believe it or not, 3 different drafts of a shot list, even before I got to the set, even before I knew what everything was going to look like, before I went on a location scout. But it helped me. It helped me to create a vision, just to create a vision for myself. And when it came to actually shooting, I just threw it all out the window. But it was good for me to be able to go through the practice of doing that. And as far as knowing what to do, and the notes that I gave to myself, which was, if someone said to me, you're going to be asked 400 questions a day, 400 questions every day. And I thought, okay, how am I going to answer these questions? Yes, no, good idea, show me, or great. Those are the answers I would give. So I had to just trust that the team, as you just said, it's about a team effort. Everything that comes your way, everything that comes together is a team effort. It's like painting in a group of people together, creating a piece of art, not coming in with that ego that people come in with, or you think that you should come in with as a director. You're just a human who loves to create, to be able to work with everybody on this. And for me, I mean, one thing I learned, which was interesting, was time. Like, how much time do we have to the first AD? How much time do we have? Can I get this shot? What it is I can do. But it's about being open, about being as ready to accept whatever there is out there, knowing that you know some things, knowing that you don't know some things, but that every step of the way is a learning process, every single shot that you make.
Well, I want to thank all of you for talking with me about your work today. One of my favorite things about doing these panels is your work is all so incredibly different, and so hearing you all talk about your process is really exciting. So thank you all again for talking with me about your work this year, and best of luck with these projects and your future projects going forward.